You probably weren't really there. The 60s were certainly an interesting time, and automotively may well have been one of the best times in our lives. Though in all fairness, I suspect Henry Ford over here is going to say that no, we're making the best stuff right now, and in large part he'd be dead right. But we've got a very distinguished panel of people you'll have an opportunity to ask questions of, and though this might look like an intro sheet, it is actually some of the arrest records of some of these gentlemen. So I'll be revealing some of the dark side of what you don't know about the people over here made so famous. Of course, the gentleman who actually started the legend of winning, the very first Cobra to ever win a race, was driven by no less than Billy Krause. Billy, if you join us up here, please. Don't let his size fool you. This guy has a very heavy right foot, and it was put to good use, let me tell you, at the introduction. A gentleman that I've had the good fortune to know through mutual friends and see from time to time and share the love of flying with, and that is a gentleman I like to call a friend, and that, of course, is John Morten, a very important Cobra driver and a lot of history in racing. We'll get into that in just a minute. John, if you would. And I'm not bringing you up in height order, I promise. I'm not doing that to you, buddy. Of course, I see Alan Grant there, who was foolish enough to confess to me that only he and my dad were stupid enough to ever drive a car called the Corvette Cheetah, or as they knew it, the Gyro. This is a car that had the engine in the center, which is, if you know anything about polar moment of inertia, is not exactly where you want the engine. So they didn't go on a great fame and forest, but obviously a very famous Cobra driver, and frankly, a big part of the Shelby legend. And that, of course, is Alan Grant. We'd like to bring you on up. Welcome to the panel, Alan. It's good to see you, my friend. Of course, now, he goes around pretending he's actually connected to the Ford family. What he doesn't tell you, it's not the car side, it's actually the former president's side, but he's been leveraging it to great effect in the use of a lot of cars personally. It actually is true. He's part of the Ford family, and that, of course, is Henry Ford III. Henry, would you come on up? He is, in fact, part of our company these days. And he's a sharp kid, by the way. He's homely, but he's really smart. Got a lot of promise. Of course, when your name's on the building, what are they going to do, fire you? Not likely. And of course, the man who is actually tasked now with the job of carrying the legend on, bringing products to you and to future Shelby owners. And that, of course, is the gentleman running the company at this point, and that is John Luft. John, why don't you join us, please? And Don Prudhomme is here, but you know, they can only walk in straight lines in drag racing. And there were a number of S-curves on the way to get up to the stage, so Don may be struggling with that a bit. But Don Prudhomme is here, and we're going to have him up here as well. Gentlemen, if I can have you take a seat, we'll go ahead and get a round of questioning going. There's some things you should know about some of these people. Alan Grant probably has as much Cobra time as anybody on the board here. Alan, you started driving. Well, you were pretty clever in how you got yourself a Cobra ride. You know, everyone that worked at Shelby's was pretty much like everybody who works in Hollywood. They were aspirational to become a Shelby factory driver. Alan was clever, and that's how you became famous in those days. You had to be clever about it. But you managed to get yourself in a Cobra seat. The good news was it wasn't a waste. You got the job done.
Thank you. Absolutely. In fact, the comment that you just made is that, I'd raced in AC Bristol. And then I went back to college, and during semester break, I'd been reading about Carroll putting a V8 engine in the AC chassis. So during semester break, I went down there and offered my services as a driver. And he kind of looked at me and he said, well, I got plenty of drivers. I got Phil Hill and Dan Kearney. He says, but we're looking for welders. Can you weld?
Yeah, very similar job.
Yeah, very similar. And he says, you come to work for us. He says, if we get a chance we need more drivers, we'll give you a chance. We'll come to find out he told that to most everybody in the shop.
Yeah, Morten was there under the same fallacy as well. But the good news is when those guys got the chance, they did it. If you know John Morten, you got to pretty much love the guy. I was talking to Pete Brock just this morning, who lives in Henderson, Nevada. I live in Boulder City, Nevada, so we've become even closer than we were over the years. And he says that be sure and say hi to John, because he absolutely, despite having an extraordinarily cutting, dry sense of humor, is one of my favorite people to be around. And those most of you know, Pete Brock's the guy that not only designed the stripes on these cars, but he also designed the World Championship Ford Daytona Coupe, which, by the way, you have some time in as well, Alan. So, but John actually earned his stripes the hard way. Started with a Lotus 7, which, by the way, was a demon little car. I wouldn't call it the world's safest car, but they definitely were a good little car. And then the Lotus 23s, which was probably a contest of keeping the wheels attached to that thing. And then, of course, did work your way into Cobras, and you've driven a lot of stuff, and thank God you have survived two of what I consider to be some of the nastiest crashes in the business. And that, of course, is in the IMSA GDP car at Lime Rock, which was a horrifying crash. Thank God you stepped out of that wreckage. And then unfortunately, recently, even at Monterey, you got on your head, and as I understand it, and you were pouting quite graciously, hurt your new helmet even, huh?
Yeah, ruined it. And speaking of Lotus Super 7s, I bought one for nostalgic reason. I'm scared to death to drive the damn thing.
You get smarter as you get older.
Yeah. But I came to Carroll a little differently. I went to the racing school, spent all the money I had left from not going to college, and I did it in the prototype Cobra, the CSX 2000, which he's kept to the end. And he gave me the job as janitor, which I was not quite qualified for, but a little bit more than I was to be a race car driver at that time. Eventually, I moved my way up to parts chaser, and then I ended up driving a Cobra its first time was at Sebring, and I was really the only warm body left to stick in the thing after Miles hit the tree with it and broke his ribs and was too tired to continue. So that was my break into big time racing.
Listen, I'm a big fan of attrition if it gets you in the seat, you know what I'm saying? All right, the guy that probably surprised the planet has got to be Billy Krause, because he showed up with a car that I quite frankly believe the Corvettes never thought they'd ever see the taillights of, and frankly that's all they ever got to see. And that, of course, is driving the very first racing Cobra and instantly to victory at Riverside Raceway against what had to be just about every stolen Corvette in Southern California that was now racing. Billy, talk about that experience, and what was that weekend like?
Well, that weekend was a little different than most, but Carroll and I were competitors for years, and we both drove for Maserati. We happened to end up in the same exact cars for a while. We both drove 450Ss, which were the big V8s, and I managed to beat him most of the time. And then we got into birdcage Maseratis, and that was another competition. And I was the last guy to ever pass Carroll on the racetrack in a professional race. That was the week after I won the Grand Prix at Riverside with all those guys. Then we went to Laguna Seca, and it was Brabham, McLaren, and Phil Hill, and Gurney. All those guys were there. But anyway, I had a mechanical problem. I was running second. They ran it in 200-mile heats in those days for I don't know what reason. But anyway, I didn't finish the first one, so I had to start last, which is 24th or something. And I caught Carroll toward the end. He was in a birdcage too, but he was running third. And he thought if I passed him that he would lose the National Driving Championship. I didn't know anything about that. I just know he was harder than hell to get by. We had the same car. I tried left, tried right, tried this, tried everything. I had everything but run into him because I didn't want to get killed after the race. So anyway, finally he made a little bobble and I got by. I looked up, and after about a half a lap, and I thought I was going faster than God, nobody could keep up. Well, he wasn't very far back. He was only like a car length and a half, and I said, how the hell's he doing that? And then, yeah, if I start 24th and catch him, how can he keep up with me? Then I looked up about 3 turns later, and he wasn't there anymore. And then I didn't see him anymore, but later when he hired me to drive the first Cobra, which was a wonderful opportunity for me. I was a young guy, and all I wanted to do was win races, and I didn't care what kind of car it was, or if it had 3 wheels or 6, as long as it won. But anyway, I said to him, I said, hey, Carroll, when that happened at Laguna Seca, I mean, I was driving so hard, my hands are bleeding, and I said, finally get by, you stay there, and then you don't. You're gone. And I swear to gosh, I didn't know he had a heart problem. None of us did, or he wouldn't have been running. He said, well, Billy, after you got by, my heart started hurting. He said, I had to reach in my uniform and get a nitroglycerin pill, and when I looked up, you were gone. And that's a true story.
The sport's changed just a little bit since those times. You know what? I got to put this question to him. I met Henry when he was a lot younger. I've been very impressed. You've come to the company. You haven't just come in, under the I'm attached to family. You've come in here to work. You've learned a lot. They've had you in a lot of positions, and it's pretty obvious where the intention is. Are you enjoying the experience? And is it harder than you thought it might be?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that I am by far the least qualified panelist up on this stage right now, and don't trust me, I understand that. But no, that's fine. I started working at Ford in 2006, and I've been out here in California for the past year and a half. And you know, the automobile industry is always a competitive industry, but it's a lot of fun, and I've learned a lot of things along my way, but I think one thing that always has been kind of near and dear to my heart is the heritage of the company. both from our family's point of view and from the larger point of view, and obviously, Carroll Shelby had a huge role in that, and Shelby American and the Ford Motor Company have had just, an amazing history together, and I really think there's a lot of value to that, and so for me to come out here to events like this is just a lot of fun, because I get to meet people who are passionate about cars, who love Ford, who love Shelby, and it's just a really great thing to be a part of, and I don't think a lot of other companies have that kind of heritage. So for our company, it's a real asset, really is.
It's a very good point, and it's funny because your dad and I were polishing wheels back in the early Trans Am days. He was on the Cougars, and I was with my dad's Mustangs doing Shelbys, and that was pretty, like John said, I was pretty much at my skill set level at that point. They didn't trust me to actually put them on, but you could polish them. So his father is Etzel, who, by the way, is just the nicest guy.
Yeah, he was out here one summer washing transmissions for Carroll, I think. That was a summer job.
He had done that. He worked out at Strops,
Yeah.
and I know your dad did the rounds out here as well. Of course, I have to tell you, at some juncture, they are going to bring you back to Michigan, and I don't know if you've noticed the winters there lately, but...
Yeah, I have. I've been paying attention to that.
Yeah.
I look at the weather reports. I'm not looking forward to it.
Quit that right away. Well, first of all, Don Prudhomme is here, and I want to make sure you all know him, as I said to you. There were several corners required to get up to the stage, and Don pretty much does straight, but... Don, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, great being here. Too bad Carroll's not here with us. We were friends for a long time. You might wonder what's a drag racer got to do with all these Cobras and so on out here. But back in the day, probably early '60s, we were mounting tires over at Carroll Shelby's Goodyear store. He was the distributor for drag racing tires. Got hooked up with Goodyear way back, and Goodyear was the tire to run back then, and we raced at Lions Drag Strip, local tracks around here, and once again, Carroll had this little tire store over by the airport. We went over there to mount up some tires, and I didn't really know him. I knew the name Shelby, but because we were drag racers and he was road racer, but later on I learned that he was also a drag racer, and that's how he got his thoughts of running those big Ford engines in those little bitty cars, because he knew that that's what we did at the drag races. But that's when the days when they just didn't mount them for you; you had to mount your own. And so I was over there and hadn't met him. Am I doing something wrong here? Oh, okay. How about that, huh? So anyhow, I was over there mounting tires, and this guy come pulling in the lot, and he was driving the Lincoln Continental, which is really a brand new bitchin' car back in those days. It was really cool. And I looked over, and there was this real good-looking gal sitting next to him, with another guy, his henchman, sitting next to him, and I thought, this guy's really cool. I got to meet him. And he kind of tells me, gives me one of these, come on over here. So I went over and stuck my head in the door there and window, and hey, I'm Carroll Shelby, and yeah, I'm Don Prudhomme, I'm doing this and that. And he says, yeah, and he introduced me to everybody. And I looked down, they had a 6-pack of beer in there. They're all drinking beer and eating peanuts, So I went back to Mountain Tires, and the guy that was helping me says, who was that? And I says, I don't know, but he was the coolest son of a bitch I ever met in my life. Hope kids aren't here. But anyhow, that's how I first got introduced to Shelby, and he was just one of those magic guys that he was a guy's guy, I guess you could say. Probably, as someone once said, the most interesting guy in the world. Most interesting man in the world, and I really think he was. But I really got to know him later on in 1967. We were running a Ford Cammer. Ford sponsored us. They first came out with the overhead cam engine, and a guy by the name of Lou Bainey owned the car. Ed Pig built the engines. They asked me to drive it. We did. The car ran good. We went to Carroll Shelby's. I thought about, hey, how about if you put your name on the car or get involved with you? And we met with him, and he was bigger than life at the time. They'd already You know, I've been to Daytona and did all that, and he was really a big time deal. So he sponsors. So I still got the dragster that says Shelby Super Snake on it. And we went out and ran and won, and he became, well, he was a real good friend of Wally Parks, who run NHRA. They were really buddies, you know. So Carroll was always around in the hot rod era, and I got to know him well, and we were buddies right to the end.
Well, modesty keeps you from mentioning that how many world championships you have. You are, like my father, actually in the Motorsports Hall of Fame. You are actually in the International Motorsports Hall of Fame. NHRA is still very proud of your accomplishments, considers you one of their top 5 drivers ever. You drove funny cars before there was technology, when it was just like really stupid to do them. So you survived that period. We congratulate you on that. And quite proud of the fact that you tried to race a Ford when, quite frankly, the Hemis were just starting to really come to dominance in that series. At this juncture, we're looking at awfully big horsepower out of those engines and drag cars today. I was talking to Anton Brown recently, and he was saying over 10,000 horsepower. Is that true? Yeah. The response was probably in his car. It was also an interesting dialogue on how much nitromethane you guys go through in a weekend. He was saying somewhere in the round of 4 55-gallon drums, and they can't even buy it here in the U.S. They got to buy it from China, because I guess the Department of Defense won't let anybody sell nitromethane in this country. So kind of it, but you can buy fertilizer all day long. But don't power your drag car with it. All right, that said, the gentleman who now it falls on, and I'm going to come back and ask these guys the questions. We'll start to get the truth out of them. Prudhomme came close, Krause came close, Morten, Yates, they owe us more, and we'll get it. But the gentleman who now falls really at the helm of this thing, whose job it is now to carry this legacy forward, and Lord knows this is one hell of an automotive history that you're going to have to try and live up to. I hope the Focus can help you do that. We're on your side. It's a demon little tweaker, and I understand we're going to go after the Rice Rockets with it, but the point is, you're still going to have to bring some fire breathing to the game, and to that end, I'd like everyone to understand this is the guy that's got this job.
Thank you very much. You know, you're absolutely right. You Billy Krause, Johnny Morten, Alan Grant, Don Prudhomme, you guys are tough acts to follow. First 50 years, you set a foundation that the Shelby brand, the Shelby legacy will live on forever. Now we're treading new ground, all of us. See, the spirit of Carroll lives in every car that revved here today. And I can tell you, over the last couple of years before Carroll passed, we would have several public events, and Carroll, we'd say, Carroll, why don't you come out here? We're doing this, we're doing that. He said, no, I'm not, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. I finally asked him, I said, Carroll, I said, why is it hard to get you to come to these events nowadays? He said, John, he says, I'm not going to be around forever, and it needs to be about the cars and not about me. And you know what it is? Every one of you are here today because you love and respect the man just like all of us. The first 50 years set a foundation that everybody here now has the responsibility to carry on. See, it's our watch. It's our watch now. And I can tell you that the spirit, the age group I see amongst this group and all the groups we see across the country tells me we're in good hands. And you know what? I can't wait for the next 50 years. And I thank you guys for setting up such a tremendous foundation for us to carry on.
Yeah, the delta's pretty high, isn't it? The delta's pretty high. All right, let's cut to the chase, get to the truth. What was it like to drive for Carroll Shelby? How competitive, how fiercely mean were they? I'll give you an example. In the 60s, my father was a Shelby driver. His name was Jerry Titus. They were going to a Trans Am race that, quite frankly, Ford had now decided to back the Cougar, not the Mustang, so Shelby had to find private money to field a little two-car team. And they went to Sebring, and a lot of people wonder, well, why this automotive journalist and who's this dentist guy? I mean, who are they going to get it done with? Well, when they put the cars in the front row, all of a sudden people noticed, wow, I don't know who they are, but damn, they're fast. Well, Parnelli Jones was in one of those Cougars, and I've had the good fortune being teammates with PJ, and let me tell you, the guy's a whistling good driver. Well, one of the things that Shelby asked my dad in the transporter before the start of this 4-hour race at Sebring for the TA cars, what are you going to do? What do you think the strategy is going to be? And Dad goes, well, I think I better get rid of PJ because I don't want to put up with that for 4 hours. And Shelby, and you know the story, John. Shelby said, well, really, you think you get rid of him? My father goes, yeah. And he goes, I'll give you $500. You come around at the end of the first lap and there's no Parnelli left. Well, you offer my dad $500 in 1967, he'd have shot a nun and the Pope. $500? There wasn't a prayer Shelby had. Parnelli had him making that lap. So sure enough, they got to the tight hairpin, which is pretty famous at Sebring, and go figure, somehow Parnelli didn't make that corner. Here's the good thing about Parnelli. He walked down to Shelby while the race is alone. He goes, "Who is that son of a bitch? Because that dude's brave." So they actually became very good friends. But that's how competitive it was. Shelby would goat you. He would push you. He would do anything he could to antagonize you to make darn sure you ran up front. Now, you see over here, there's a car, the John McComb car, a Trans Am car, one of the Shelby built cars. When my father crashed his car at the last race in '67 at Kent, Washington, pretty ugly accident, by the way, but having said that, he crashed in practice. They went over to John McComb and said, "Look, we need this car." And the goal was, because the Camaros were so fast and the Cougars were quick as well, but the Camaros had really come to speed. Donahue and Ronnie Buckton and the guys who were running those cars had really gotten competitive, in which case we needed a rabbit. So Ronnie Buckton was assigned the job of make sure you finish and let's get the points and win this championship. But we're going to go ahead and build that car for Titus overnight, and we're going to have him scoot and try and drag Mark with him and maybe blow that Chevrolet up. Odd as it sounds, my dad was leading, Mark was chasing him. They both popped their motors, and Ronnie Buckton won the championship in '67. So it was a team that had a lot of brains on it too. They knew how to get the job done, but it was that kind of industry. It's still that kind of game today, to be honest with you. John, you've run some rough races, and you drove what my dad did not idle many people, but I got to tell you, Ken Miles, Alan, you know what I'm talking about. This is one of the best drivers ever. You got to drive with a guy that was a total talent and legend.
Yeah, I got to drive with Ken twice. I only drove Cobras 3 times, and twice it was with Ken. The first time at Sebring, he'd pretty much wrecked the car, so there wasn't much left of it when I drove, and it was, like I said, I was the warm body that got to ride it around till it finally blew itself up. But then I drove with him at Elkhart Lake, and I started the race with Skip Scott and I were driving. And there was a 3-car team. Ken was, I think he was with Bob Johnson and Ed Leslie. I can't remember exactly what the teammates were, but Ken blew the engine in his car, leading the 500, leading the class. And I started the race. Skip drove second, and I was to finish the race in third. But they stuck Ken in it because he was obviously was, yeah. And we won. Ken won, but we won.
But you were there too.
I was there. But it's funny. He was an incredible fitness guy way before his time, because he was an old man. I mean, not compared to me now, but compared to race car drivers then, he was probably 45 at the time, maybe 46. And he'd run in the morning at the races, and everybody thought, "You've got to be crazy, get up at 5 in the morning and run." But I was, he was my hero, and as all the drivers were, and he said, "You want to run in the morning?" And I said, "Yeah, okay, I will." So he'd knock on my door at 5 in the morning, and we'd get up and run through the woods at Watkins Glen or down the beach at Daytona. And anyway, he had more endurance than anybody I ever saw back then, or even now. I mean, he could get in a stock car and run 500 miles and probably not break a sweat.
Ken was a great race driver, but I don't know why John says Ken blew the engine. I always said the damn engine blew up. I never said I blew the engine. I gotta tell you, one time after a race, somewhere in Nevada, I think, Ken had a Jaguar passenger car, and my wife and I decided to ride with him back to the motel. And I gotta tell you, we raced probably 5,000 miles against each other, never bumped each other. I bumped everybody else. But anyway, we never had any problem on a racetrack. Riding with him 20 miles back to the motel is the worst ride I ever had in my life. He was talking, he was looking the other way, we were wandering all over the damn room. I said, God, if we get to the hotel, I'm never getting in that car again.
See, I told you I'd start getting the truth out of these cats, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, and they're not even drinking. Can you imagine the stories you'd really get if I had them drinking? Alan, I got to ask you, I always thought that Ken, who was known as the Hawk because he had this nose that I think aerodynamically was an advantage back then, because you wore open-face helmets, it stuck out there, had a little windshield on them Cobras, and I really think it helped to get the air past the roll bar in those cars. Cobras had days when they were the strongest car, then you had days you had to pedal really hard to make those cars run up front.
Yes, in fact, I can remember my first race at Santa Barbara. and I'd been talking pretty brash about, you know, what a great driver I was, and et cetera. And at the time, you know, a Cobra had never lost to a Corvette, and so consequently, I grew up with George Lucas, and we'd come up with this beautiful bright yellow Cobra with black stripes going transverse across the hood and then down at an angle.
They know what Cobra is.
Yeah, okay. Anyhow, bottom line is that we got up there and all these Corvettes were running these Bruce Sports Car Special, which are really a heart. And so consequently, I couldn't, you know, come with close to their times. And so I happened to have a friend that lived in Modesto, and he drove up to Oakland and then drove down to Santa Barbara, and we got our slicks on. So we were turning some really good times, and actually no, we hadn't turned any good times. And so Shelby, unbeknownst to me, this was on a Saturday afternoon, drives up, you know, from LA to Santa Barbara, and I was surprised to see him. And he says, Alan, he says, you're kind of in the middle of the field. And I explained to him what had happened. He says, okay. He says, what's your plan? And he says, let me just recommend. He says, why don't you just kind of cool it a little bit and pick these guys up, pick the Corvettes off on the back straight. And I said, yeah, that's what I had in mind. And so Santa Barbara being an airfield, you know, they dropped the flag, and these Corvettes, they decided not to go. And I pulled to the inside, and the first turn I was second, and the third turn I was first. And so we went on to win. But one thing about Carroll, you know, what an incredible loyal guy, and he would literally, you know, back you even to a fault. If you were wrong, he would still back you. But that was a good experience in racing, and how competitive it was. And of course, you had to have the right car and you had to have the right tires.
That'd be the right day. All right, Prudhomme, you get into these funny cars. They were an aerodynamic disaster. As near as I can tell, they leave like a rocket ship. I still don't believe you're actually driving that car for the first 300 feet. I think you're like a passenger. You can dispute that, of course. And you decided to run a Ford at a time when, frankly, that was not vogue. You want to talk a little bit about those cars, the evolution you've seen in them, and, of course, the notion of running a Ford motor, which we appreciate, but clearly was not the trend at the time.
Well, I hate to tell you this, but actually they were. They were just very hard. They were just very hard to get. You know, we were running 392s, 392 engines. You know, the early Chrysler stuff, and then the Hemi first come out, the big one, 426. And you know, the Camry Ford. Actually, in '65 we won a race in. At Pomona. I was driving the car called the Hawaiian, dragster with Roland Leong, and one of the awards was up outside a little bit of money. Was a Ford Camry engine, a Ford Camry engine, and a Ford truck with a little camper shell on the back. That's before people had campers, you know. Yeah, and that was an award. Actually, so we won the race, and actually used the Ford pickup and the camper to tour a dragster around the country, but it only got about 2 miles to a gallon. With all due respect, Ford. Yeah. So that was short-lived. So
How many cubic inches today are we seeing?
They're less than 500. They're 490 something right into their cubic inches, and you know, you hear all these numbers about the horsepower, but you know, you can't really put them on a dyno. There's really no dyno that what you could do it with because of the way the fuel system is. They pump about 100 gallons a minute or so. The fuel pumps. So the way the things work is that there's a centrifugal clutch. So when you see them on TV and they leave the start line with all the fire coming out of it, that's because the clutch is actually slipping at that point to get the car launched. And then there's an automatic timer inside the clutch department. It has about 6 discs in it now, what they call centered iron discs, and it's a centrifugal clutch. So as the car moves, it starts applying more weight. So this big bearing starts coming back, and you start adding more weight to the clutch. So the curve goes up with the engine and peaks over, and then as you start adding more weight to the clutch, it pulls the engine down, and then it starts pulling the engine back up again. That's why sometimes you'll see it through the middle of the course either strike the tires or just hauling ass right through there, because it goes 1-to-1 in about about halfway down. And about halfway down, I was at Pomona earlier, first part of the year, and watching the guys, and I think someone ran 290 in the 8th mile, you know. Yeah, so they only run 1,000 foot now, and the reason for that, it just become too damn dangerous to go any farther.
Do you agree with the 1,000 foot?
I completely agree with the 1,000 foot mark, yeah, especially when I was a team owner for all that time. And it raised heck on the engines, and it's not a real sophisticated engine. It's not like the engines today and the fuel systems and the electronics, all pneumatic fuel system, the timers and everything. It's a whole lot of horsepower to try to control with the primitive type of system that it is, you know. So that's another story for another day. But yeah, it's the most. I'm around IndyCar racing all the time and all kinds of racing. I really like it, but still today, the most exciting thing I've ever done is stand behind a top fuel dragster at the start line when it leaves. It's quite a thrill.
I heard you say road racer, and you almost choked on the word road, like it was a dirty word. I realize road only has 4 letters in it, but it still seemed like you had trouble saying road racer, Don. Don't start with me, fool. I got people.
Hey, I am the world's biggest Formula One fan. Oh my God, I was up this morning watching F1 race. Of course, I got TiVo now. Oh yeah, Hamilton. I follow it big time. Formula One, always have. Matter of fact, when Senna was killed in '94, shortly after that, I got a chance to go back to the Grand Prix in Brazil, and at Interlago, wherever, you know. And went down to the Grand Prix. And the first thing I did is I went and put my bags in the room, went over to the where he was buried to visit his gravesite. So that's how much I thought of Ayrton Senna. So yeah, I'm a huge F1 guy.
As far as I can tell, you're a fan of the most expensive forms of motor racing, as near as I can tell. Obviously, there are a ton of questions. I'd love to get Henry in a really honest mood and ask him what is the most terrifying thought he has as you look at yourself coming into what is the family legacy, what is your family history, and the jobs in front of you as you get to the top. I'm curious, can you talk about it? Are there things that you look forward to that concern you? I mean, your dad's the head of the board, chairman of the board. I mean, you've got a lot of family history to live up to, buddy.
I do, and yeah, it terrifies me on a daily basis. So thanks for bringing it up again. I appreciate that.
That's what your dad wants me to do.
No. Listen, I mean, it's you know, I love Ford, and I'm really honored to be a part of that legacy, and it's you know, I'll do my best to carry on that, and you know, I learned at a young age that I have very big shoes to fill, and you know, so I go to work every day like everybody else does, and I try to do the best I can, and thankfully there are a lot of good people working at Ford, and I think we have a bright future ahead of us, and you know, I think we've got some great products on the road now, and things got a little scary back in 06, 07, but you know, we made it out, and I think we're a stronger company as a result of that. And it's you know, it's a real pleasure and an honor for me to work at the company, and it's fun, it's exciting, and so I try to not think too much about yeah exactly. But no, I love it, and I love cars. I love being around car people, and it's just a fun industry to work in. I can't imagine doing anything else.
You know, it's so interesting, having been involved in so many facets of the car business, everything from selling cars, being a service writer, service manager, to actually being a what they call a Tier 3 test driver at Ford Motor Company, and being a public spokesperson for them. The complexities of this industry, I just whispered to Henry a minute ago, this gig isn't as easy as you thought it might be, huh? It is a very, very sophisticated, complicated, and dynamic business. It moves, and you need talented people at the top of this. All right, we're going to turn this over to you now. I mean, this is a very distinguished panel. Some of you must have questions. Don't be shy. You can see I'm up here making a fool of myself. Don't be afraid to jump on up here, and let's ask these guys some questions. You don't get this opportunity every day. I mean, racing legends, clearly another racing legend, the gentleman at the helm, and the kid that's going to run this joint. So be nice to him. You know what I'm saying? He may decide what cars he gets to modify someday. So, who's got a question for any one of these panelists? You drive Shelbys, and that's all the courage you got? Come on up.
I just want to say that I was there when Billy Krause and Carroll Shelby were racing in that 60 times Grand Prix. It was one of the most fun, exciting. It was my first Grand Prix, by the way, at Riverside, and it was one of the most exciting days of my life. And it really got me going about sports cars. And I was so impressed with Billy and his race that I went to your dealership and bought a Honda Mini Trail from you. One of the best bikes I ever had, Bill. You made this. It was, and it was. You made the deal with me, and you were good. And I really enjoyed that little bike. I also want to say that, Don, I have a 68 Mexican 1000 race car that you raced against. You were in the 68 race. I don't think many people realize that you raced the Baja 1000 in 1968. So I look at the records of the book, my car, and your name is there with the other cars. And that must have been quite an important, rather interesting time for you. Maybe you could comment on that.
Yeah, I'm curious. Were you off-road on purpose, or did something go wrong while going straight?
No, like I was, see, I like racing. Yeah, not just drag racing. Yeah, I got to go with Tony Nancy, actually. You know, Tony Nancy, everybody knows that name from back in the day. He's a great guy. Bill did upholstery, and he was also a drag racer. He was building a car. It was actually owned by Steve McQueen. It was a Solar production car. Yeah, and Steve McQueen, you'd just go to his shop there and hang out. We'd all be there, and Tony built him this off-road car. It's right about the time that he was really, getting into that stuff, But anyhow, yeah, we ran it in the race, but we burned it up pretty quick, Didn't quite have the right cooling to it. It had a Porsche engine in it. But it was a nice little car. It was a heck of an experience. But just being around McQueen back in those days, and of course he had a Cobra too. I didn't see him drive one, but I have some pictures of him with a Cobra. And those were the days, man. It was great fun.
Who else got a question? Yes, sir. And by the way, before I hand you this, I did find a Mac book charger on the ground. If somebody lost it, it's sitting up here on this dais.
Thank you. Thanks to Jenny for hosting the event today, along with the LASAAC Club. Yeah, had to say that. This question is for Henry and also for John. Will Ford or Shelby ever go on the international scene and race like Le Mans or anything like that?
Yeah, you don't feel on the hook for that. Yeah, who wants that one?
You start.
I don't. The short answer is I don't know, but obviously we're still heavily involved in NASCAR and NHRA. I would love to see us get more involved in some of the road racing circuits in Europe, especially Formula One. Jackie Stewart had that Jaguar Formula One team back when we still owned Jaguar, and we got burned a little bit on that. So I think But you never know. Maybe we'll come back. I mean, racing. Obviously, racing is a huge part of the history of the Ford Motor Company and Shelby American. And we've got our Boss 302Rs and our 302Ss that are in some of the series now, like the Pirelli World Championship. So I would love to see us start racing at Le Mans, and I am sure that there are a lot of people working on that now, and so stay tuned.
Oh, thanks, Henry. Thank you. Whatever Henry just said, I agree. I can tell you it's no surprise. The cost to get on the racetrack today is outrageous. Back in the day, I mean, when I think of what Carroll spent to race back in the 60s, probably wouldn't field one car in one race today. But chances, we currently will provide parts, provide expertise, a variety of hard components to different grassroots race venues that put Shelby on the car. I can tell you that Bill Dembesti, Bill and Lori and the team are here. They are running a car in the Nationwide Series. Dedicated Shelby enthusiast, collector, Cobra dealer, owns the Carroll Shelby Engine Company. Bill rolls his Nationwide car with Shelby on the car. We do that, and he does that because of the love and the passion. I can afford love and passion. What I can't do is afford to write a check. But the fact is, we do try to provide parts and help the best we can. But the reality is, as Carroll said, over the last couple of years, he said, John, he says, I've finally come home. And what Carroll meant by coming home was coming home to Ford Motor Company. And the fact is, our relationship is as strong as it's ever been. It's a great one. It'll be even greater in the future. And as Ford works in their different venues, and you see Ford build Shelby product, listen, we get to live vicariously through their efforts out on the track. So, thank you, Henry.
Yeah, Carroll got crazy for a little while. He kind of went Britney Spears on us. He starts going to Chrysler and a few other things, but he came back. We got him back on. John, you've driven a lot of different Ford products. You see what's going on in your vintage racing now.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a simple comment. I've been reading a book recently. Yeah, very new. Taken me a long time. But I don't know if Henry even knows this. You know who Ford's first race car driver was? Barney Oldfield.
Oh, wow. Well, that made us feel a lot younger. Thanks, John. Since we all hung with the guy,
You were just talking about the cost of running in motorsports today, how expensive it really is. And I think one of the things that saved motorsports really was televised sports, especially televised racing and NASCAR, getting the television ratings that they get today. But I know when Carroll and I were in Nassau, we took the first Cobra, and they had to send one Cobra to Holman and Moody, which is a NASCAR team, to build an engine for that one. And we immediately excelled in that event. But we were there, and we ran really well the first weekend. And Nassau, it used to be, I don't know what they do now, but it was a weekend of racing, a week of party, and another weekend of racing. And we were just supposed to run the first weekend, but because our performance was what it was, Ford called Carroll and said, hey, Carroll, you guys got to stay another 5 days and run the next weekend. And because it was what it was, economically, I said, Carroll, I don't have any money. Tell Ford to send me $500 so I can stay the rest of the week. And he said, okay, I'll get $1,000 for me and $500 for you, and he did.
Carroll. Now, Alan Grant's sitting up here. He's obviously living large off his previous accomplishments in the Cobra. And this is an interesting thing about Alan's history that very few people know. Alan could definitely be trusted in anybody's car at 175 miles an hour. But putting it up on a transporter, well, that's a little trickier, huh, Alan? Want to talk about that for just a minute?
Yeah, I sure would.
Can't wait.
I had built the best Daytona coupe in the world, and Joe Huffaker, I think it was actually loading the cars, and he was slipping the clutches in Landacre. And so I thought, man alive, I don't want to do that. And so I asked if I could load my own car. And they said, sure, go right ahead. And so I got in the car, and of course, we're talking about a car with 4 Webers on it. And so I took off, and I got a little run at it, and it got up close to the top, and I could tell I didn't have enough speed going forward. So I tried to give it just a little bit of throttle, and it didn't take. So I gave it a little bit more. It didn't take. Gave it a little bit more, and it took. And you know what happened? It lit up those rear tires, and of course, these were trailers that had little ramps about this wide, and the tires were this wide. And so consequently, when the tires spun, it went off to the side, and thank goodness for that 3/4 inch. Irony is, did you load that car?
Yes, he did.
I think you did. And our clutch slept the whole race at Daytona.
Let me tell you what. Let me tell the story. Let me tell you what really happened. Alan was right about one thing. It was the prettiest Cobra, because he color sanded it and made a show car out of it. The others were just squirted blue, like race cars were. And his car, consequently, was late being loaded. I loaded all the cars. Landacre, or whoever the truck driver was, went home to get a nap before the trip to Daytona. So I'd never loaded them before. You had to drive them up the ramp, the top cars, the open car hauler, and it was tricky because they had Daytona gears, 288 I think. So you had to really go with commitment. I loaded all of them but one, and Alan brings his out of the paint shop, and it's a show car. And Alan and I lived together at the time. Well, not quite like that. we shared an apartment.
That's really good. Hey, you know.
Anyway,
National Choir.
I said, I'm not loading your car. And you said, why not? And I said, because if I screw it up, you'll kill me. So he said, well, screw you, I'll load it myself. So I said, okay, let me tell you how to do it. You just get right at the bottom of the ramp and punch it and stop really quick because there are 2 cars right in front of it and you don't have much room to stop. So Alan lined it up, and then for some reason he backed up about 10 feet or so and hit it at a running speed. And I mean, he didn't do anything wrong except that, because the car got a little cocked on the ramp and it went part way up and it finally fell through. And that little rod that stabilizes the 2 ramps is why it didn't go to the ground. And Remington yells at him, "Stay in the car," because he knew if it fell through, it'd kill him. But Alan popped out of that thing like a jack in the box. And okay, well, and so it went back to the body shop and got some primer on it, and they sent a can of paint down to Daytona with it to finish it, and then I loaded it at the end.
John, how long have you had selective amnesia?
This will give you some sense of what really went on, I told you. Any other questions for this panel? Anybody? Am I missing anyone? Anyone want to walk up front and ask a question? So most of you are familiar with what it's like to drive a Cobra, Daytona, Sebring, Brands Hatch.
Scariest moment.
Pardon me?
Scariest moment in a car.
Scariest moment in the car. I'll start with Billy on that one. Can you narrow it down to one, Billy?
It's between going backwards to the grass at Indianapolis where you couldn't see. That was not a very good moment. But actually, the scariest one was at Riverside a week before the race in '59. I'd put a Chevy V8 in my D Jaguar, and it was probably the fastest car in the country at the time. Weighed about 1,900 pounds, and good horsepower. And I was practicing a little bit. It was scary fast, so I came in and tried some experimental tires on the back. Went up to the S's, and I used to have a habit of just kind of flicking the car through turn 2, so I didn't have to make that other corner. And I flicked it all right, but it spun and went upside down, went up on the embankment, landed upside down. Well, it was a week before the race, and fortunately it was in the dirt, so I was laying on my left arm and I was strapped. The fuel pump's running, it's dark because you're upside down, tore the windshield and the hood off, and I laid there because they didn't have a tow truck. It finally took probably 10 minutes to get enough guys to turn the dang thing over. It was on the hill, and they started to roll it down the hill, and it was rolling out on my arm. I said, "No, you got to go the other way." I can't see. Well, the other way was uphill, but they finally did. But that period of time there, laying upside down here and the fuel pumps running, that was a scary time. I knew I was toast, but I guess I got by with it.
I got to ask you the same question, buddy.
Well, I wonder if I should do the scare-up one or the... probably with the Nissan, because I was conscious at the first part of it, and I was maybe 130 miles an hour at Lime Rock, upside down. Did a blowover like an unlimited hydroplane. And I'm thinking, damn, this is a brand new car that's worth $250,000. What am I doing? Actually, I didn't think that. I thought that was probably the end of me, but it turns out it wasn't.
Well, the way that thing landed, caught fire. I mean,
yeah. Well, the roll cage when it landed, it tore the fuel filler off because, of course, it had a dry brake. I had a fuel cell, but that sprayed the fuel as the car started to tumble, and it centrifuged like a napalm bomb. And as it landed, it broke the roll cage. It came unfastened, so it basically didn't have a roll cage any longer. It was on fire, and as it landed, my helmet came off. so all that saved me was the safety belts and the fact that it landed on there weren't any wheels left, but it landed on the right side up, so the fire went out.
Hey, John, you're supposed to fasten that little strap.
that would have been worth knowing. Alan, you've had to pass it.
Oh, yes. This is at Daytona 1965. Prior to that time, I'd been in 11 races, an AC Bristol and a Cobra. I was 24 years old, and I got to drive, for the factory team at Daytona Coupe. And so we were out at practice, and I had been out a few laps, and so I was going pretty much at top speed. And you come out of Daytona on turn 4, there's a little hump, And so I was rocking and rolling and feeling pretty comfortable in the car. And next thing I knew, I went over that hump, and that car was sitting at 45 degrees, going 180 miles an hour. And I'll tell you, my entire life went before me in a fraction of a second. And of course, going that fast, if you overcorrect, man, you're in deep trouble. And so, fortunately, I was able to save it. But I'll tell you what, that just scared the crap out of me.
This must have sounded like a warm-up lap to you, 180 mile an hour. You're saying, geez, it was a pace lap, right?
I was sitting here thinking, which one am I going to tell them about? You're talking about. Hey, I was thinking too, though, that drag racing cars were really built to crash back in the day. The way the roll cages were around them, the way the tires were next to you, so you could flip that thing, which we did several times, and usually walk away from it. And then you look at the Cobra back in the day, you had the little roll cage, and your body could get thrown around in the car pretty easy, wouldn't you say? Where you're like hanging half out of the car. So even in the early days, they were built for that. And in today's world, they're really nice. And I noticed the Cup guys now have all the protection around them, and that funny cars, dragsters have had that all along, or John Force wouldn't be living. But yeah, I had a lot of them. Shit, I've been on fire upside down from here to England.
It's drag racing. Of course you've been on fire and upside down.
Okay, imagine 2007, Gardena, California. Carroll Shelby takes delivery of his first Super Snake, and he says, "John, you want to go for a ride?" Oh, okay. We go out here, pull on the 405. By the time we merge into traffic, we're at 130 miles an hour. Now, in 2007, Carroll started losing his sight, okay? All right. So I'm hanging on for dear life. He's going through the gears like butter. We merge into traffic at 130 miles an hour. And I said, "Carroll," I said, "can you see that car? Can you see?" "Well, no, God damn it, I can't see him that well." But I said, "Well, how are you driving?" He says, "Well, I just drive between the blurry marks, And I go, "Okay, all right." And what goes through my mind is I thought, well, if I have to go and we die today, I will have died with a racing legend. But then the reality set in, and I thought, no, this is how the headline will read: Carroll Shelby dies in car crash with unidentified male.
Very good, Jeff. Very good. You didn't ask me, but my scariest moment was report card day, 1968, standing in front of my father. I just thought you might want to know. Yeah, he drove Trans Am cars without power steering for 4 hours. You want to guess how big the guy's arms were? I knew I had about 4/10 of a second to come up with a really good line of bullshit. And as he said to me after I got done laying my best work on him in terms of why that report card looked so catastrophic, he said, "I'd be far more inclined to believe your excuses if you didn't always have one," which really took the wind out of my sails. That hurt me, that hurt me. All right, Henry, have you had some scary moments? Have you been with some people?
I mean, my moment is it's sort of embarrassing, but I have an 08 Shelby KR, and actually, to be honest, I've always kind of wanted to be a professional race car driver, and I've told my father on several occasions that I've threatened to quit Ford Motor Company and start racing as a profession. That's never gone very well. Those conversations are not fun. Yeah. But I do like to get on the track every once in a while because I just think it's a lot of fun. And so I was up at Willow Springs not too long ago, and I was in my car and I was going around turn 3, and turn 3 is kind of a late apex turn, and I took it too early, and I got on the gas, and the rear end just spun out, and I did a 360 and landed on the gravel, and I was fine, and the car was fine. My pride was a little hurt, and that's yeah right. But also I did also have a really cool experience. Last year I was at the Mid-America Ford Shelby Nationals in Tulsa, and there was a dealer down there, a Ford dealer, and he had a Cobra Jet, a 2010 Cobra Jet, and he said, do you want to go for a ride? I'll take you down the track in it. And I said, sure, why not? So I got in the passenger seat, and he hit the gas, and we did, I don't know, we hit probably 180 at the quarter mile or something, which, is nothing. You do that in your sleep, but For me, it was quite an experience. It was a lot of fun. But you know, it's, I don't know. Whenever you can get on the track, it's always a good time.
I know your mom, and I can't imagine these stories that go over well at home. So, I was just going to say, but keep that to yourselves. Well, ladies and gentlemen, rather tire these gentlemen up. They are going to step down from here, but a big hand, if you would, please. These are the legend right here. Thank you, guys. We appreciate it.